I had always believed silence was a kind of power, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard, the kind that watched, waited, and understood far more than words ever could. That silence had carried me through years of working late nights, raising a child alone, and pretending that the world's judgments didn't matter. But I never expected it would be the same silence that would one day expose everything, the truth about who I really was, who my son had become, and who his wife's family truly were. It all began with a phone call on a quiet Thursday afternoon. "Mom," Marcus said. His voice came through the phone, steady but careful, the way people sound when they're trying to hide something. "Yes, dear?" I asked, setting my pen down. I was at my office, though Marcus never really knew what that meant. To him, I just worked in an office. "There's something I wanted to ask," he said after a pause. "Simone's parents are coming into town this weekend. They'd like to meet you. We're having dinner with them on Saturday." I smiled instinctively. "Oh, that's lovely. Where?" There was another pause. Then, "At La Fontaine." I froze. La Fontaine wasn't just a restaurant. It was the restaurant. The kind of place where each dish came with a story, and the prices were printed only in invisible ink. The kind of place where the elite went, not because they were hungry, but because they wanted to be seen. "Ah," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I see. That's quite a choice." "I know," Marcus replied quickly. "It was their idea," Simone said. "Her father loves French cuisine." "I see," I repeated. Then, quietly, "Marcus, do they know anything about me?" Silence. Then, with hesitation, "I told them you work in an office, that you live alone, that you're simple." Simple. The word landed like a stone in my chest. "I see," I said, forcing a laugh that didn't sound real. "Simple. That's one way to put it." "Mom, please don't take it the wrong way," he said. "Simone's parents they're a little old-fashioned. They value appearances. I just don't want things to be awkward." "Of course," I said softly. "You don't want them to think your mother might embarrass you." "Mom." "It's fine," I cut him off gently. "I understand." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. The city lights flickered outside my office window, reflections bouncing off glass towers I had helped build metaphorically and literally. My name sat on one of those buildings, though no one would know unless they looked very closely. For 25 years, I had been an executive in one of the largest multinational firms in the country. I managed deals that made and broke companies. I had flown to cities my son couldn't pronounce. But to him, I was just Mom. A woman who packed leftovers in reused containers, who wore the same coat year after year, who took the subway instead of owning a car. And that was fine. I had built my life on discretion, not display. Still, something about that phone call, about that single word, simple, left a mark. That night, I stood in front of the mirror in my small but elegant apartment. My reflection looked back. Calm eyes, faint lines of experience, a face that didn't crave attention. But behind those eyes, a decision was forming. If my son and his wife's parents thought I was a poor, naive woman, then that's exactly who I would be. Not out of pride. Out of curiosity. I wanted to see how they treated someone they believed had nothing. I wanted to see if their politeness was genuine or merely performance. Because sometimes, the only way to reveal who people truly are is to let them believe a lie. Saturday arrived. I dressed the part carefully. A faded beige dress that looked like it had seen better days. A pair of worn-out shoes with peeling soles. A cheap cardigan that sagged at the shoulders. No jewelry, no perfume, no hint of sophistication. I tied my hair back in a messy bun and stared at myself one last time. Perfect. Forgettable. Invisible. As I left my building, the doorman gave me a confused look. "Mrs. Sterling, are you—" "I'm fine, Anthony," I said, smiling. "Just a little experiment." He nodded, still puzzled, as I walked away. The taxi ride to La Fontaine was silent, except for the soft hum of the city. My driver glanced at me in the mirror once or twice, probably wondering what a woman dressed like me was doing, heading to one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. I almost laughed. When we pulled up to the marble entrance, I took a deep breath. Crystal lights sparkled above the doorway. A valet in a tailored uniform opened the door, his eyes flickering briefly in confusion before he masked it with professional courtesy. Inside, everything glittered. The walls, the chandeliers, even the conversations. And then, at a corner table by the window, I saw them. Marcus, Simone, and two impeccably dressed people who looked like they'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. My son's eyes widened when he saw me. "Mom," he said, standing awkwardly. "You came." "Of course," I replied, smiling timidly. "I wouldn't miss it." Simone's expression was polite but cold. She kissed my cheek mechanically. "Mother-in-law, you look comfortable." I ignored the undertone. Then she turned to her parents. "Mom, Dad, this is Marcus's mother." The woman, slender, elegant, diamonds glittering around her neck, offered me a faint smile. "A pleasure," she said, her accent sharp and practiced. Her husband merely nodded. "Good evening." I sat at the end of the table, unnoticed as the waiter poured wine. They spoke of travels, investments, private clubs, and art auctions. Every word a small blade of condescension. Every glance a silent judgment. I smiled, nodded, and let them talk. Because they didn't know who I was. Not yet. But they would. Oh, they would. The first 15 minutes of dinner were tolerable. That's the word I'd use now, tolerable. At the time, it felt like walking on a frozen lake, each polite exchange threatening to crack beneath the surface. The waiter poured sparkling water. Simone's mother ordered an impossibly specific wine. Her father corrected the pronunciation of bouillabaisse when Marcus asked what it was. I sat quietly, hands folded on my lap, pretending to study the gold-embossed menu. No one asked what I wanted to eat. "Mother, perhaps the salad?" Simone suggested sweetly. "It's light." I smiled. That sounds perfect. I didn't add that I could afford anything on the menu, even the entire restaurant if I felt like it. That wasn't the point tonight. The point was to listen. Simone's mother, Claudia, was the kind of woman who spoke in measured tones, each word soaked in quiet arrogance. Her husband, Richard, barely looked at me. When he did, it was with the detached politeness reserved for staff members or strangers on a train. "So, Marcus tells us you work in an office," Claudia said, her voice smooth but probing. "Yes," I replied softly. "Administrative work." "And how long have you been there?" "Oh, quite a while. I suppose they keep me around because I'm reliable." "Ah." Her smile was thin. "Loyalty is a lovely quality, isn't it?" I nodded, sipping my water. Richard looked up. "You must be proud of Marcus. He's done very well for himself." "I am," I said. "He's always been ambitious." Simone reached for Marcus's hand. "He's the youngest regional manager at the firm, you know," she said, her tone light but triumphant. "Dad always says that kind of drive runs in our family." Richard smiled at his daughter, then turned back to me. "And you must have taught him, what, humility?" The table chuckled softly. Marcus's laugh was nervous. "Dad, come on!" I smiled again. "Perhaps. Or maybe he learned to climb by looking up, not down." Richard raised an eyebrow. He wasn't used to being answered. Simone's eyes darted toward me, just a flicker, but enough to confirm what I'd suspected since the moment I arrived. She didn't want me here. Dinner arrived. Dishes gleamed under the light like artwork. The waiter set a small plate before me, an elaborate salad decorated with edible flowers. Claudia leaned in. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" "It is," I said, then added gently, "though it's mostly decoration, don't you think?" She blinked. "Excuse me?" "Pretty things aren't always nourishing," I said, "but they do make us forget that for a while." Her lips tightened. Marcus cleared his throat. "So, Simone, how's your mother's charity project going?" "Oh, splendidly," Claudia said quickly. "We're hosting a gala next month. It's for underprivileged children. We teach them etiquette, art appreciation, things like that. It's important to elevate their taste, don't you think?" I tilted my head. Elevate, or change. Richard gave a polite laugh. "Same thing, isn't it?" "Not always," I replied. "Some people don't need to be changed just given a chance." The table went quiet for a beat too long. Simone took a sip of wine. "My parents believe in refinement, she said. It's what separates well, you know. I do, I said softly. It separates those who think they're better from those who actually are. Her glass paused midair. Marcus looked horrified. Mom. I smiled. I'm joking. Everyone laughed, but uneasily. As the evening went on, the questions became subtler, sharper. They wanted to know where I lived, what school Marcus had attended, whether I'd ever traveled abroad. I played the part perfectly. I told them I'd never left the country, that I'd worked the same job for decades, that I preferred simple things. Every lie was true in tone, if not in fact. Because simplicity, I'd learned, isn't about money, it's about peace, and they didn't have any. At one point, Claudia leaned closer, lowering her voice as though we were sharing a secret. I must say, you're very composed, she said. You remind me of our housekeeper back in Provence. She was such a sweet woman, hardly educated, but so polite. I looked at her for a long second, then smiled. Politeness hides many things. Oh? Yes, I said softly. Sometimes it hides intelligence, sometimes it hides contempt, sometimes both. Claudia laughed, not realizing I wasn't joking. Dessert came and went. The table was a battlefield of unfinished conversations and fragile egos. Richard ordered cognac. Simone excused herself to take a phone call. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear. Mom, he whispered urgently. Please, just be careful. They can be judgmental. I know, I said, looking at him kindly. So can I. When Simone returned, her tone was brittle. That was the event planner, she said. Mom, the seating chart's still a mess. Then fix it, Claudia replied. You know how important this gala is. Simone sighed dramatically. I'm trying, but some of the sponsors don't want to sit near certain people. What kind of people? I asked, though I already knew. The kind that don't fit in, she said, her smile tight. You know how it is. I looked straight into her eyes. Oh, I do. For a moment, something flickered there, discomfort, perhaps. But it vanished as quickly as it came. When the bill arrived, Richard reached for it. But Marcus stopped him. No, please, Dad, I'll handle it. Richard chuckled. Don't be ridiculous, son. This place isn't cheap. Marcus hesitated. His hand froze halfway. Simone's eyes darted toward me. Maybe your mom can contribute, she said sweetly. Marcus turned pale. Simone. I smiled. That's all right. I can pay for mine. Richard raised an eyebrow. Really? Of course, I said. How much is it? He hesitated. 350. I nodded thoughtfully, reaching into my small purse. Inside, a worn leather wallet intentionally aged for effect. I pulled out a few bills and placed them neatly on the table. They weren't American dollars. Claudia frowned. What's that? Yen, I said calmly. From my last trip to Tokyo. Marcus's head snapped up. Tokyo? Oh, I said, blinking innocently. I must have grabbed the wrong wallet. Silly me. Richard stared at me for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. Then he laughed. You're quite the character, Mrs. Sterling. I've been called worse, I replied. We stood to leave. As we walked out into the cool night air, Claudia took Simone's arm. Next time, darling, she whispered, not as quietly as she thought, perhaps somewhere less public. Simone didn't answer. Marcus opened his mouth, but I shook my head gently. Good night, I said. It was enlightening. Claudia smiled thinly. Likewise. The driver opened the car door for them. As they climbed in, Claudia glanced back at me. You're lucky, Mrs. Sterling, she said. You raised a son who escaped his circumstances. So, I smiled. Yes, I said. He did. And as their car disappeared into the traffic, Marcus turned to me, guilt written across his face. Mom, I'm so sorry. Don't be, I said. You warned me. He hesitated. You're not angry? I looked at him, my voice calm but firm. No, Marcus, but I am curious. About what? About how far people will go to hide what they are and how far I'll go to remind them. That night, as I undressed and folded my plain clothes neatly over a chair, I allowed myself one small smile. They thought I was poor. They thought I was naive. They thought I didn't belong. Perfect. Because the next time we met, I wouldn't be pretending anymore. The restaurant shimmered under golden lights, its chandeliers reflecting on the polished marble floors. Waiters glided like ghosts in black uniforms, their trays balanced with quiet precision. I stood at the entrance, clutching my worn handbag, every eye on me. Marcus saw me first. My son, tall, well-dressed, handsome in that way success polishes people. His smile flickered when he saw my old dress, and that single flicker told me everything. He walked toward me with the forced calm of someone trying to manage embarrassment. "Mom, you came." "Of course, dear," I said softly. "You invited me, didn't you?" Simone appeared behind him, my daughter-in-law. Her heels clicked sharply on the floor. "Mother-in-law, so nice to see you." The words came out like cold glass, smooth, but dangerous if you touched them wrong. Behind her, two elegant figures rose from the table, Veronica and Edward, her parents. They looked like the kind of people who never waited for anything in their lives. Veronica, in a green silk dress and diamonds bright as frost. Edward, tall, with silver hair and an expression that carried money like a perfume. "Mrs. Hale," Veronica said, extending a manicured hand. "What a pleasure." I smiled faintly and took it. Her skin was soft, but her touch had no warmth. "The pleasure's mine." We sat. I was placed at the far end of the table, as if they wanted to keep their distance from whatever ordinary I might carry. The menu arrived, French words dancing across the page like a secret code. I pretended to struggle reading them. Veronica leaned closer, her smile tight. "Would you like help with the menu, dear?" "That would be lovely," I murmured. She waved to the waiter. "She'll have something simple. Maybe the chicken. It's light and affordable." My son shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, it's fine," I interrupted, giving him the same soft smile I'd given him since he was a boy who scraped his knees. Dinner began. The conversation was a parade of wealth, the hotels they'd stayed in Paris, Rome, Dubai, the art they'd bought, the cars they drove. I nodded politely, as though hearing fairy tales. Finally, Veronica turned to me. "And what about you, Mrs. Hale? What do you do?" "I work in an office," I said quietly. "Paperwork mostly. I try to keep busy." "Ah," she said, with a sigh sweet as poison. "That's nice. Honest work. Not everyone needs to chase ambition, right?" Edward chuckled softly. "There's dignity in simplicity." I smiled. "Yes, there is." But in my chest, something ancient stirred. Not anger, no. Anger was loud. This was colder, sharper. The feeling of a woman underestimated one too many times. When the food arrived, Veronica cut into her steak like a queen performing a ceremony. "You can taste the difference when it's premium," she said. "This one's imported. $80 a plate." "How lovely," I said. She studied me over her wine glass. "Marcus told us you live alone. That must be difficult at your age. Managing bills, food, all that on a modest salary." "I manage," I said softly. "I've learned to live within my means." "How admirable." She smiled that pitying smile again. "We all wish we could give our children more, of course, but we do what we can." Simone shifted uncomfortably. Marcus clenched his jaw. Veronica wasn't finished. "We helped Marcus and Simone with their home, of course, paid the down payment $40,000, and the honeymoon 3 weeks in Europe." She laughed. "One does what's necessary to give the next generation a good start." I nodded, my smile never faltering. "That's wonderful, truly." Then she leaned closer. "You must feel proud. Even if you couldn't contribute much, I'm sure your blessings meant a lot to them." The words landed like a knife, slid gently between ribs. I took a sip of water. "Yes," I said. "I gave what I could." For a moment, the table was quiet. Then Veronica continued, her tone shifting to something falsely compassionate. "You know, Mrs. Hale, we were actually thinking of something. Edward and we'd like to help you. Financially, I mean. Nothing extravagant. Perhaps a small allowance each month just to make sure you're comfortable." Marcus sat up straight. Mom doesn't need. Marcus, Veronica interrupted sharply. We're only trying to be kind. I tilted my head. How generous of you. And what would you expect in return? Nothing, Veronica said too quickly. Just, perhaps you could let the young couple live their lives without worrying too much about you. Give them some space. Ah, there it was, the offer to buy my absence. How much were you thinking? I asked calmly. She blinked, surprised by the question. Oh, I don't know. Maybe $500 a month? $700, if necessary. I nodded. $700, to stay out of my son's life. Veronica's smile faltered. That's not what I said. But that's what you meant. The table went still. Even the background chatter of the restaurant seemed to fade. I placed my fork down carefully. You know, it's fascinating. You've spent the last hour talking about money, yet not once have you asked about me as a person. You see people as price tags, Veronica. Everything has a cost, even dignity. She flushed. I think you're misinterpreting. No, I said, quietly. I'm finally interpreting you correctly. Edward frowned. There's no need for hostility. My wife was simply trying to help. Help? I turned to him, my tone still calm, almost gentle. Or control? You don't help people by humiliating them. You don't lift someone by pressing them down first. Veronica opened her mouth, but no words came out. I leaned back, watching her crumble under the weight of her own arrogance. Tell me, Veronica, how much did you spend on that dress? She blinked. Excuse me? That dress, I said. It's beautiful. Silk, custom-made, I assume. A few thousand. Her eyes narrowed. What's your point? My point, I said slowly, is that the cost of your dress could pay for a month of rent for 3 single mothers. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? Because you think wealth gives you worth. Veronica's lips tightened. I think it gives freedom. No, I said, standing now. It gives you the illusion of control. Real freedom comes when you stop needing to prove your value to anyone. Marcus's voice trembled. Mom, what are you doing? I smiled softly. Removing the mask, darling, just like they asked me to. Veronica frowned. What do you mean? I reached into my faded handbag and placed a sleek black card on the table. The restaurant lights caught the metallic lettering Eleanor Hale, Regional Director, Global Operations, Merton International. For the first time that evening, Veronica's voice broke. Regional Director? Yes, I said. For 15 years. I managed teams across 5 countries. I signed contracts your husband's company once begged to be part of. Edward's face went pale. That's impossible, Marcus never said. Because he didn't know, I said. I never told him. I wanted him to learn humility before wealth, to earn his own success without my shadow behind him. Veronica's eyes widened. You mean all this? Yes. The dress, the bag, the act. I smiled. I wanted to see who you were when you thought I was nobody. The silence was deafening. Simone had tears in her eyes. Marcus was frozen, his world rearranging itself in real time. You offered me $700, I continued. Let me make you a counteroffer, Veronica. I'll give you $1 million right now if you can tell me a single time you treated someone without money with genuine respect. Her mouth opened, closed, then stayed silent. That's what I thought. I slid the black card closer to her. Dinner's on me. Consider it a gift from the poor, stupid mother you tried to buy off. Then I turned to my son. Marcus, let's go. We walked out together. The air outside was cool, the city alive with lights. Marcus was quiet for a long moment before whispering, Mom, I'm sorry. I smiled and took his arm. Don't be. Tonight wasn't about shame. It was about truth. And truth, my son. I looked back at the restaurant's glowing windows. Always costs more than money can buy. The night wind was sharp as Marcus and I stepped outside the restaurant. The golden glow from its windows spilled onto the sidewalk like liquid fire, reflecting off the rain-soaked street. I heard laughter echo from inside other people, other worlds, but ours had gone quiet. Marcus walked beside me, his steps heavy, his eyes unfocused. He didn't speak for several minutes. The city around us pulsed with life, honking cars, murmurs of strangers, the distant rhythm of jazz from a nearby bar, but between us there was only silence. Finally he spoke. "Mom, I didn't know." "I know," I said softly. "I thought you were." He stopped himself. "I never asked." I looked at him. "You didn't need to. I wanted you to believe I was simple. I wanted you to grow without the weight of my success crushing you." He swallowed hard. "I let them treat you like that. I didn't stop them." I sighed. "You were afraid. Afraid they'd look at you differently if your mother didn't fit their idea of success." He nodded slowly, shame tightening his shoulders. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." I placed a hand on his arm. "Don't apologize for what you didn't know. Just learn from what you've seen." We stood under the awning, the city lights glimmering in puddles at our feet. For the first time, my son looked at me not as the mother who raised him, but as a woman who had lived, fought, and built something powerful in silence. He finally asked the question I'd been expecting. "Why did you hide it? All these years?" I smiled faintly. "Because people treat you differently when they think you have money. They pretend to respect you, but it's not respect, it's strategy. I wanted to see who would value me for who I am, not for what I have." He looked down, his voice trembling. "And now you know." "Yes," I whispered. "Now I know." When I returned home that night, my apartment felt smaller but calmer, like a storm had passed through and left clarity behind. I placed my old handbag on the table and sat down by the window. The lights of the city stretched far below me, a sea of glowing ambition. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "They want to talk to you tomorrow. Please, just listen. Maybe it'll help." I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. "We'll see." I didn't sleep much that night. My mind replayed every detail: the pity in Veronica's eyes, the smug tilt of Franklin's mouth, Simone's silence. But beneath the noise of anger, there was something else. Disappointment. The kind that doesn't burn, it freezes. By morning, my resolve was ice. The next day, Marcus came to pick me up. He looked like he hadn't slept either. We drove in silence to their house, a mansion of glass and marble that looked more like a monument than a home. The kind of place that demanded admiration but gave no warmth. Simone opened the door. Her eyes were swollen. "Mrs. Hale, thank you for coming." I nodded. "Let's not waste time." We walked into the living room, where Veronica and Edward sat waiting. The same elegance, the same perfection, but something had changed. Their confidence was fractured. Veronica's hands fidgeted in her lap. Edward's voice was quieter than before. "Mrs. Hale," he began, "we owe you an apology." I sat down calmly. "Do you?" Veronica looked at me, her eyes still proud, but her voice careful. "Things got out of hand last night. We didn't mean to offend you." "You didn't mean to offend me," I repeated. "You meant to measure me." Veronica blinked. "Excuse me?" "You measured my worth in dollars, in clothes, in the car I arrived in. You offered me pity because you assumed I had less. That's not offense, Veronica. That's arrogance dressed as kindness." Her mouth opened, then closed. Edward tried to intervene. "We understand now that we misjudged you." "Misjudged?" I tilted my head. "You didn't misjudge. You revealed yourselves." The air in the room thickened. Even Marcus looked nervous. Simone sat silently on the edge of the couch, her hands shaking. I turned to her. "You knew how they were. Why didn't you stop them?" Tears welled up in her eyes. I was ashamed. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, it would end faster. I sighed. "Silence never stops cruelty, Simone. It feeds it." Veronica's voice rose slightly. "We're trying to make peace here, Mrs. Hale." "Peace?" I leaned forward. "Peace requires honesty, not excuses. So let's be honest. You were humiliated because the woman you looked down on turned out to be richer, more powerful, and far more educated than you. That's why you're apologizing not for what you did, but because your assumptions collapsed." Veronica's face flushed red. "You're twisting this. We simply wanted to protect our daughter." "From what?" I asked quietly. "From a mother-in-law who doesn't wear designer shoes? From a family name that doesn't sparkle in gold letters?" No one answered. I stood. I didn't come here for your apology. I came here so you could see the consequence of your own arrogance, because last night you didn't just insult me, you insulted your own daughter. You showed her that love in your world is conditional, transactional. That's the tragedy, not me. Simone broke into quiet sobs. Marcus reached for her hand, but she pulled away, her shame too heavy. Veronica tried to compose herself. I don't need to be lectured in my own home. Then perhaps you should have learned humility somewhere else, I said coldly. I turned to Marcus. Let's go. But before I reached the door, I stopped. I looked back at them, Veronica frozen, Edward stiff, Simone trembling, and I said one last thing. Money can build walls, Veronica, but character? Character builds bridges. You might want to remember that before you find yourself alone on your side of the wall. Then I left. Outside, the air was bright and cold. Marcus followed behind me, silent again. As we reached the car, he finally said, "You didn't forgive them." I smiled sadly. Forgiveness isn't something you give to people who aren't sorry. He nodded slowly, understanding. "Will you ever tell Simone the whole story?" he asked. I looked at the horizon. She already knows enough. The rest is for her to reflect on. We drove away. The mansion grew smaller in the rearview mirror, swallowed by distance and time. That night, I cooked dinner alone. The same simple dishes I'd always made. But this time, every bite tasted like liberation. I sat by the window again, watching the lights flicker across the skyline. Somewhere out there, Veronica was probably replaying the night over and over, trying to find a way to rewrite it in her head where she still held the power, where her world still made sense. But some truths, once spoken, can't be unsaid. Some masks, once cracked, can never be worn again. And as I watched the city, a quiet smile crept onto my face, because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, not for my money, not for my position, but for my strength. And that, I realized, was worth more than any apology. The city looked different after that night. It wasn't the streets or the skyline that had changed, it was me. The next morning, the air felt lighter, my steps more certain, my reflection in the mirror finally familiar again. But I knew the calm wouldn't last. People like Veronica don't simply fade away. They plot, they talk, they twist. By midday, my phone was already buzzing with messages from Marcus. Marcus, Mom, something happened. Marcus, they told some people about last night. Marcus, it's spreading. I didn't respond right away. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, staring at the sunlight streaming through the curtains. It wasn't anger, I felt it was inevitability. I'd exposed the truth, and truth has a way of echoing louder than lies. When I finally called him, Marcus's voice trembled. They told Simone's family friends that you pretended to be poor just to embarrass them. They're saying you staged the whole thing for attention. I closed my eyes. Of course they are. Mom, you don't understand these people talk. They have connections. Simone's worried it'll affect her job. I took a deep breath. And what do you think, Marcus? Do you believe them? There was a pause. No, he said finally. But Simone's scared. She doesn't know what to do. Then tell her the truth, I said softly. Tell her that sometimes people fear the reflection they see in others. Veronica saw herself in me, and she hated it. 2 days later, an invitation arrived. Handwritten, formal, sealed in gold. Mrs. Eleanor Hale, you are cordially invited to a private dinner at our home this Friday. We would like to discuss an important matter in person. Edward and Veronica Langford. No apology this time, no emotion, just strategy. I folded the card carefully and placed it on the table. I knew what this was. They wanted to reclaim control, to rewrite the story, to turn their humiliation into civility. So I decided to go. Friday came cloaked in quiet tension. The air outside their mansion was still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Marcus insisted on driving me, but I told him no. This time, I said, I go alone. When the butler opened the door, the house smelled of polished wood and gilt. Veronica greeted me in the foyer. Her voice was smooth, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. Mrs. Hale, thank you for coming. Let's skip the pleasantries, I said. She blinked, thrown off. Of course, please, this way. We entered the dining room, smaller than the one from our first dinner, more intimate, but just as perfectly arranged. At the table sat Edward, Simone, and Marcus. Yes, Marcus. He looked up, surprised. Mom. I frowned. You said you weren't coming. They insisted, he whispered. Veronica gestured to the chair across from her. Please. I sat. The table was quiet except for the faint ticking of a clock somewhere behind us. Edward cleared his throat. We invited you tonight because we thought it best to address the situation. Situation, I repeated. Yes, Veronica continued. There's been talk, and we'd prefer to settle it before it causes any more damage. Damage to what? I asked. Our reputation, Edward said bluntly. I smiled without humor. Of course. Veronica's voice softened, performing humility. Eleanor, we don't want conflict. We all said things that night we regret. I don't regret a word, I said. Her mask cracked, just slightly. Be that as it may, we have to move forward. For the sake of the family. Simone's hands were clasped in her lap, trembling. Mother, please. Veronica ignored her. We've spoken with Marcus and Simone about appearances. It's important that, moving forward, we maintain unity, harmony. That means keeping private matters. Private. Meaning? I asked. Meaning, Edward said carefully, we'd appreciate it if you refrained from speaking about last week's dinner, or about us, to anyone. The morning after the dinner, the city felt restless. Even from my modest apartment, I could sense the tension in the air, not from me, but from the ripple I had created. Marcus had called early, his voice tight with worry. Mom, the recordings, they're everywhere. Some of Simone's family friends have already shared snippets online. People are talking. I placed my coffee on the table and leaned back. Good. Let the truth breathe. Let them feel the weight of their arrogance. But Mom, the media, Marcus stammered. They could spin it, make you look vindictive. I smiled faintly. Vindictive is what they call strength when they're weak. By noon, notifications started flooding my phone. Headlines ranged from mother-in-law mystery, billionaire mother exposes in-laws, to socialite family humiliated by matriarch's secret wealth. I scrolled through the feeds carefully. Veronica and Edward's reputations were crumbling, not because of lies, but because of their own words, captured in the restaurant's surveillance. Every calculated smirk, every subtle insult, they had given the world the evidence themselves. That evening, I received a call from Simone. Her voice was shaky, but there was clarity beneath it. Mom, thank you. I know this is complicated, but people are finally seeing them as they really are. I chuckled softly. And how does that feel, Simone? Liberating, she whispered. But also frightening. My parents, they might never forgive me for this. Then maybe you're finally free, I said. Meanwhile, the social media storm grew. Journalists called, bloggers posted, and everywhere. The story spread like wildfire. The woman who had appeared poor and naive, yet secretly wielded power, intelligence, and wealth. Veronica and Edward scrambled to control the narrative, but their attempts only drew more attention. Every statement they released sounded defensive, hollow. People were not fooled. Through it all, Marcus stayed by my side. His admiration, previously unspoken, was now palpable. Mom, I never realized, he said one night, as we watched the news coverage, how much you sacrificed, how strong you were. I reached out, squeezing his hand. You saw last night. That's enough. The scandal continued to unfold. Invitations to interviews, requests for statements, and countless messages poured in. I remained calm, deliberate. I never spoke of my money, only of the values that guided my life. Dignity, effort, respect. Veronica and Edward, on the other hand, spiraled. The world now questioned not just their arrogance, but their character. Their wealth, once a shield, now highlighted their superficiality. Simone called again, a hint of relief in her voice. Mom, I've learned so much. About my parents, about love, about respect. I think I understand you now. I smiled. Good. Understanding is the first step toward independence. And Marcus? She asked. Marcus already knows, I said. And the rest? The rest will follow, I replied. In time, people always reveal themselves, some with words, some with actions. Sometimes it just takes a mirror. As the night drew to a close, I looked out my window. The city lights reflected on the streets below, like sparks of countless untold stories. But mine, the story I had lived, the one I had kept in silence for so long, had finally emerged. And the people who had underestimated me, who had tried to measure me by their standards, would never look at me the same way again. Because true power, true wealth, is not what you display, it is what you quietly build. And when the world finally sees it, the effect is irreversible. The morning after the viral dinner incident, the city buzzed in a way I had never experienced. Notifications exploded across my phone, headlines screamed. Billionaire mother exposes socialite family's hypocrisy. The mother-in-law they tried to humiliate just outshined them all. A lesson in respect, what happens when wealth meets integrity. Marcus sat beside me, scrolling through the articles, his jaw clenched. Mom, it's everywhere. People are analyzing every word, every gesture from last night. I sipped my coffee, calm. Let them. They're seeing exactly what I wanted them to see. The truth. And truth doesn't hide behind wealth. It stands on its own. Simone called shortly after, her voice barely above a whisper. Mom, it's overwhelming. Everyone is talking. Even my coworkers know. I don't know how to face them. You face them, I said firmly, with honesty. You've seen what manipulation looks like. You've seen what pretension looks like. You now know the difference. Marcus shook his head. I never realized how much you carried alone, how much effort went unnoticed. I smiled softly. Not unnoticed, but silent strength doesn't seek applause. Meanwhile, Veronica and Edward were scrambling. The footage from the restaurant's own recordings, and the social media explosion were more than they could control. Every word they had spoken in arrogance now echoed publicly. Veronica, furious and trembling, reached out to me through a formal email. Dear Mrs. Hale, we would like to discuss this matter privately. We believe there has been a misunderstanding and would appreciate a chance to clarify. I read it slowly. Misunderstanding, I muttered. Yes, the misunderstanding is that you thought wealth could measure human worth. Marcus leaned closer. Mom, do you even want to respond? I shook my head. No, let them reveal themselves further. Every defensive post, every excuse, they are digging their own hole. By evening, the fallout reached its peak. Commentary columns dissected every angle. Is this the new model of matriarchal power? Wealth doesn't equal dignity. A mother teaches her own lesson. Socialite family humiliated but deservedly so? Even people outside our social circles began to take sides. Some praised my quiet perseverance, others criticized the public exposure. But one thing was undeniable. The story had gone viral. Simone called again. Mom, people are starting to respect you more than my parents. Even strangers understand now. Then the lesson has been delivered, I said. And the rest is up to them to internalize. That night, as I sat by my window, city lights flickering below, I reflected on the events. The anger, the arrogance, the false pity, they all had consequences. People think money can shield them from exposure, from truth. But truth is relentless, and it doesn't discriminate. Marcus came in quietly. Mom, I'm proud. I never imagined you had that much control. Not because of money, but because of how you handle it. How you wield it. I looked at him, my son, finally seeing me as I am not just a mother, but a force. Control isn't the goal, Marcus. Influence is. You can't command respect, you earn it. And sometimes, people only learn the hard way. He nodded, understanding for the first time the depth of what I had done, not out of spite, but out of necessity. By the end of the week, Veronica and Edward's attempts to spin the story had backfired spectacularly. The world now saw them as what they truly were, people obsessed with appearances, blind to character. Simone, on the other hand, reached out privately. Mom, I want to do things differently. I want to live my life valuing real people, not status. I want to honor your lessons. I smiled softly, proud. Then you've learned the most important lesson. Wealth is fleeting. Respect, integrity, courage, they endure. And as the city slept that night, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The storm had passed, but its mark would remain forever. Truth had a voice, and for once, it spoke louder than arrogance. The days following the viral dinner incident brought a wave of reflection and subtle transformation. For Simone, it was a reckoning. She had grown up in a world measured by money and appearances, and for the first time, she truly understood what she had been missing. She called me one afternoon, her voice tentative. "Mom, I've been thinking. About everything. About my parents, about you, about what really matters." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words settle. "Go on," I said. I think I've been living in a bubble. Everything I thought was important, the parties, the vacations, the designer clothes, none of it compares to the things you value: integrity, hard work, respect. I smiled softly. "And that realization is yours alone. You didn't learn it from lectures or commands, but from observing. That makes it real." Meanwhile, Veronica and Edward were still trying to regain control of the narrative. Their statements, meant to calm the storm, only amplified it. People scrutinized every word, every gesture. The world began to see the cracks in their carefully constructed facade. Friends, neighbors, even former business associates began questioning their true character. "All the wealth in the world doesn't teach empathy," a journalist wrote, "and arrogance often masks insecurity." Marcus, watching the unfolding events, finally voiced what he had felt for years. "Mom, you've always been strong. I just never knew the full extent." I reached over and placed my hand on his. "Strength isn't about showing off. It's about surviving, learning, and guiding those who matter. You, for instance. You learned how to navigate the world without losing your soul. That's the real lesson." Simone, inspired, began to take action. She politely distanced herself from her parents' influence, refusing to be a pawn in their social games. She volunteered in community projects, sought mentorship from people with substance rather than status, and started building a life that reflected her newfound values. Marcus supported her quietly, watching his wife grow into a thoughtful, independent woman, and through it all, Ara remained a silent anchor, guiding them, not through interference, but through example. The media continued to follow the story. My interviews were measured, intentional. I never boasted about wealth. I spoke of effort, discipline, and the dignity of building something from nothing. Each article, each commentary, reinforced the real lesson. Wealth is not a measure of value, character is. Even Veronica and Edward began to reflect, perhaps too late. Their children, and the world around them, had already judged them. They realized that their obsession with material success had blinded them to human decency. One evening, Simone called again. "Mom, I just had a meeting with some colleagues. They asked me about last week's story. They didn't ask about the money. They asked how I could have a mother so wise, so composed, so formidable. I told them about you." I laughed softly. "Formidable, I like that. But remember, Simone, the true power is silent. Influence is quiet. Recognition comes naturally when people understand what they can't buy." She sighed, a mix of relief and gratitude. I feel like I finally know what kind of life I want, and I know how I want to raise my family, with values, not status." "Good," I said, "because life will always present tests. Some will come with money, others with pride, and some with both. What matters is how you respond. That's the lesson that lasts." By the end of the week, the world had already shifted perception. Online debates about class and wealth were replaced by admiration for the quiet strength of a mother who had refused to be diminished. People were no longer talking about money, they were talking about dignity, courage, and the power of perseverance. And in that quiet reflection, I knew the ripple effect had begun. My influence was not in the headlines, not in the millions I had earned, but in the values I had instilled, the respect I had commanded, and the lives I had touched. The following week, the city still buzzed with whispers of the viral dinner incident. Veronica and Edward, finally realizing the magnitude of their mistakes, attempted to reach out publicly. Their statements were cautious, carefully worded, apologies mixed with explanations, but they lacked the substance needed to restore true credibility. I watched silently, knowing that some lessons could not be bought or apologized for, they had to be learned. Simone approached me one afternoon, determination in her eyes. "Mom, I want to do things differently. I want to honor the lessons you've taught me, not just by what I say, but by how I live." I smiled warmly. "Then you've understood the most important thing. Life isn't about appearances, it's about choices, and your choices now will define you more than any inheritance ever could." Marcus nodded in agreement, quietly proud. "Mom, I think I finally understand what you've carried all these years, and I see why you never showed us the money. It wasn't about hiding wealth, it was about teaching us values." Veronica and Edward issued a public apology on social media, their faces tense, their voices measured. "We deeply regret our behavior at the dinner. It was inappropriate, and we apologize to Ara and our daughter for the pain caused. We are committed to reflecting on our actions and doing better in the future." I read it carefully. A trace of satisfaction touched me, not for the apology itself, but for the realization it represented. They were finally acknowledging their mistakes, at least in public. Marcus and Simone began to rebuild their lives, now grounded in the lessons of respect, humility, and dignity. Simone started making thoughtful choices, refusing to let her parents' arrogance dictate her path. Marcus supported her quietly, grateful for the wisdom his mother had imparted. As for me, I returned to my simple apartment, maintaining my daily routines. The modest furniture, the quiet streets, and my small routines were unchanged, but everything around me had shifted. I had asserted my dignity without violence, without malice, and without losing myself. One evening, as the city lights reflected off the windows, I received a message from Simone. "Mom, thank you. For everything. For showing me strength, for showing me respect, and for teaching me what real wealth is." I replied simply, "Remember, Simone, the world will always test you, but if you remain grounded, you will never be shaken. Respect yourself, and the rest will follow." Veronica and Edward, though humbled, were still learning. They realized that true influence and respect could not be bought, they had to be earned. Their wealth remained intact, but the lesson of humility had been imprinted on them forever. Marcus stood beside me later that night, looking at the skyline. "Mom, everything you've done, it changed our lives, not just ours, but everyone who saw what happened." I nodded quietly. Sometimes, the strongest lessons are taught in silence, others only see the impact later. That is power, that is respect, that is wealth that lasts beyond money. The weeks that followed, the viral incident, brought a calm unlike any I had ever known. The storm of social media had settled, leaving only the lessons it had carried. For some, it had been an uncomfortable reckoning. For others, a long overdue awakening. Marcus and Simone's lives began to reflect the quiet values that had guided me all these years. They made decisions grounded in integrity, humility, and thoughtfulness. Their marriage, once threatened by the superficial standards of others, now thrived on understanding and mutual respect. Veronica and Edward, humbled publicly and privately, retreated from their self-imposed pedestal. Their attempts at control and judgment had failed, and they were left to confront the emptiness that wealth alone could not fill. Though they did not fully change overnight, the seed of reflection had been planted. One afternoon, Marcus and I sat together in my modest living room. The sun filtered through the curtains, casting soft light across the simple furniture. He looked at me, a mixture of admiration and awe in his eyes. "Mom, I've never said this enough," he began, voice thick. "You are incredible. Not because of the money, not because of your success, but because of who you are. Everything you've taught me, it matters more than anything else in this world." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "You've seen, Marcus. You've understood. That is more than enough for me." Simone visited later that day. She had tears in her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude and newfound clarity. "Mom, I understand now what it means to live with dignity, to value people for who they are, not for what they have. Thank you for showing me the way. Aw, I smiled, feeling the quiet power of what had been achieved. My life had been lived in silence, measured not by outward appearances but by perseverance, ethics, and patience. And now, that influence would ripple forward through my son, my daughter-in-law, and the lives they would touch. Veronica and Edward attempted to reach out one last time. Their voices were tentative, their apologies careful. We see now. We misjudged. We were wrong, Veronica said, her eyes flickering with a mix of regret and defensiveness. I nodded once, firmly. Acknowledgement is the first step. Change is the next. Wealth will not teach you what humility, empathy, and respect will. Remember that. That evening, I returned to my small apartment, to the simple routines that defined my life: cooking a quiet dinner, reading by the lamp, walking slowly through the park. Outside, the city moved on, buzzing with its relentless pace. Inside, I had already won. Not because of money, not because of notoriety, but because I had remained true to myself. Because I had shown that strength, wisdom, and dignity can triumph over arrogance, superficiality, and entitlement. And as I looked out the window at the twinkling city lights, I understood the final truth. The richest life is not the one filled with gold, but the one filled with purpose, courage, and quiet, enduring influence. The end.